Let's see. Well, good Sunday morning to you. As always, really thankful that you've chosen to join us today. I am glad to be back. Most of you probably noticed last week was a Sunday off for me. Church members, you were able to see, or anyone who went to the church webpage or Facebook page or YouTube channel, uh, a wonderful service from our friends at UKirk Greensboro as they gave us some perspective on communion. So I hope you enjoyed that. Um, but I'm glad you're here today. I'm glad to be back with you. I'm always excited to be here. So thank you, church members and all, for being here. If you're from abroad, not from Greensboro, North Carolina, welcome. Ask that you would leave in the comment section where you're from, just so we can see all who have gathered here. And if you are in Greensboro, North Carolina, and haven't been to the church, once we are through the COVID-19 times, I hope that you'll come and join us. Speaking of COVID-19, many states have had some of their highest days recently. North Carolina, where we are, has had their 2 highest days in their 2 past days. And the nation had its largest day yesterday as well. So please continue to take care of each other. So it's been an unusual week, hasn't it? Some really disturbing events, and we're going to talk about that today. So I guess in some ways this is a warning. I mean, Jesus was always political, almost. Anytime you hear him talking to the Pharisees or the Sadducees, he was being political, and he didn't get hung on a cross for being a nice guy. He got hung on a cross because he was a threat to those who held political power. So if it makes you uncomfortable, have a minister talking about political things, this may not be the day for you. But I promise, I'm trying to be more spiritual, guided by the text, than trying to be partisan or anything. So thank you for being here. We have an interesting day. Like I said, an unusual sermon in terms of that it leans so political, even though I do talk political because, like I said, Jesus did. But we've got 2 great songs. So today, after the sermon, we'll switch to 1 song. We'll come back for a prayer, and then we'll finish with another song. We've got a new person and a person that I think you're very familiar with. So glad that you are here. If you want to participate by donating, for instance, we pay our local musicians every time they do a song here. It's tough as a person who used to earn their living solely off of playing gigs and stuff right now. So if you're able to contribute, we certainly would appreciate it. You can go to thinkingchurch.org, and there's a donate button at the top right-hand corner. So 2 weeks ago, when I gave my last message, it was on Epiphany, and I had planned on, even though it was just the beginning of Epiphany, it being the last time I talked about Epiphany. The events that happened Wednesday happened on Epiphany, and there was some awkward and some clear parallels and some lessons to be learned between what happened and Epiphany, at least in the way that I saw it. So I want us to revisit the story. We're not going to spend a lot of time in the story as much as looking at the events of this past week, but we are going to see the comments or the commentary that some of the Epiphany story might have on what occurred this week. So the scripture today, that we only read about the Magi in one place in the Gospels, and that's in Matthew. So we'll be revisiting part of the scripture that we did 2 weeks ago. So this is from Matthew chapter 2, verses 7 through 12, because most of us know the story. We're going to enter into it after the wise men have are almost at the house. Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he said to them to go to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may go pay him homage." When they had heard that from the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising until it stopped over the place where the child was born. And when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. And on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gold, frankincense, myrrh, and having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. May we add blessing and understanding to the reading of these words. So my message today is entitled Proud Boys, Wise Men, and the Allegory of Epiphany. The leader of a nation, desperate to hold on to his power, sends a group of folks to the source of his consternation, and his intent is to put an end to those who might challenge him. And ultimately, he's willing to spill blood in order to hold on to his sovereign authority. Just a few days ago on Wednesday, many Christians observed Epiphany. It's a day when we remember, among other things, the story of the wise men. And in an eerie case of life reflecting fiction, the same story played out on Capitol Hill that day, some 2,000 years after the inaugural event of the wise men was reported to occur. Only this time the role of the wise men were played by the Proud Boys and others. And unlike the original story, the choices they made were neither wise nor did they leave them with anything about which they should be proud. As we begin to look at this ageless story that's been played out in various versions time and time again throughout history, I think it may be helpful to pretty briefly be reminded of two of my talks from the past several weeks that touch on the topic of allegory in the Bible, particularly as they relate to the birth narrative. In my message, Christmas Meaning from a Made-Up Story, we looked at the numerous issues with believing that the Christmas narrative is based on actual events. But then we went on to recognize that there's much truth and meaning to be gleaned from a story when we see it as allegory. One of my favorite, if not my favorite theologian, Bishop John Shelby Spong, put it this way. Unfortunately, the religious minds of our generation believe that these traditions can be protected from erosion only if they are literalized. And nothing could be further from the truth. The deepest meaning of this season can never really be understood until literal claims have been laid aside. Jesus's birth was not something that occurred on a silent and holy night in the little town of Bethlehem. No star announced his birth, and no angels of peace sang of peace on earth. These mythical details, rather, they embodied a beautiful and eternal human dream that we enter into symbolically year after year. And then Spong goes on to say, this is so good. Truth is so much bigger than literalism. So some human experiences are so large, so real, so life-changing, and so defining that the words used to describe those moments must break open the imagination if they are to capture this kind of truth. Our task is not to master. It's not to master or to pretend that these myths are history. It is rather to enter the experience that caused the myths surrounding his birth to be born, to be transformed by that life, and to become a new creation through that experience. And then 2 Sundays ago, we built on that perspective as we looked at the story which is popularly known as Epiphany, or the story of the wise men. I actually prefer to call them magi, but for the sake of this talk, let's call them wise ones. I concluded that message saying, just like the rest of the 2 Christmas narrative stories, the story of the magi simply is not true, but that does not mean it isn't truthful. It has some pretty powerful themes in it that are echoed not only in the teachings of Jesus, but in the teachings of many great spiritual leaders. It's time for us to reclaim the story from the literalists who wish to believe in a fairy tale like narrative that seems only to promote the superiority of one religion over all others and ask nothing of its constituents in return. This is a story of religious pluralism. After all, the wise ones were most likely Zoroastrians. This is a story of sharing with one another, particularly the rich with the poor. This is a story of resisting injustice. The wise ones choose to ignore King Herod's unjust biddings. It should be no surprise then that modern day King Herods, and I'll let you fill the blank in there, prefer the gentler fairy tale interpretation. It leaves them in power and it leaves us divided. Now, the grittier, down to earth understanding, however, it tells all of that upside down and provides a brighter star for us to all follow. One that will lead us to the divine in each other. And it'll build a world not on power and division, but one on understanding and oneness. Those lessons make the political events which occurred in the U.S. on Epiphany this past Wednesday, it makes them all the more iconic. No, ironic, considering the fact that many of the insurgents tried to pass off their actions as the will of God. It has been said that humanity was not created in the image of God, but rather God has been created in the image of humanity. And there is certainly a great deal of truth in that statement. But in the eyes of some people on the far right, while that God was vengeful at times, he wasn't vengeful enough. While that God was self-righteous at times, he wasn't self-righteous enough. And while that God was intolerant at times, he simply for them wasn't intolerant enough. So they created a new God, also formed in their image, or at least a reflection of their desires. It's not a new story. It's not a new story. As a matter of fact, that kind of near deification of a cruel leader is not all that different from those who worshiped King Herod in his day. Now, for all of those who might see this hyperbole or unfair, let me remind you that on Wednesday at the political rally, which intended to negate the well-certified will of the American people, a rally that ultimately turned into insurrection and terrorism. At that rally, folks flourished flags declaring devotion to both Jesus and Trump, basically conflating the two. They carried signs thanking God for Trump. An oversized wooden cross was inexplicably carried about, and as if that wasn't clear enough, when they breached the walls of the Capitol building, they carried a Christian flag in with them. And as the terrorists and insurrectionists broke through the barriers that were meant to separate them from the proceedings of our government, I was reminded of the wall that's supposed to separate church and state, that has been methodically chipped away at since probably the presidency of Nixon. And Trump pledged that he would build a wall. And instead, he jackhammered away at the wall of the separation of church and state. And when the barriers were broken on Wednesday, I couldn't help but see how little of the church-state wall remained. Now, in reflection of these events, Dr. Dylan Miclemore wrote in Relevant Magazine these words: "Mixing spirituality and civics isn't new, of course. It creates a powerful social identity, fusing the devotion of religion with the power games of politics. And the result is supercharged partisanship, where our political victors stir our faith and our opponents are viewed as threats to the very core of what we hold dear." The Epiphany story, like the rest of the Christmas story, is meant to be, it's meant to be a reflection of the teachings of Jesus. It's a story of religious pluralism. It's a story of sharing with one another, particularly the rich with those who have less. It's a story of resisting injustice. The insurrectionists who stormed the Capitol building, particularly under the guise of Christianity, were not only practicing in insurrection and terrorism, but they were practicing in blasphemy as well. You see, positioning their actions as the will of God was an act of revolt against the heart of Christianity. The fact that they did it on Epiphany just underscores exactly how unchristian their actions were. As I pointed out, the Epiphany story, it's meant to be a reflection of the teachings of Jesus, a story about religious pluralism, a story about sharing with one another, a story about resisting injustice. The insurrectionists were creating injustice, not resisting it. Instead of promoting the importance of sharing with each other, they were fighting to be allowed to continue to marginalize others and live out their lives with a "I've got mine" attitude. Whether they identified as MAGAs, Proud Boys, Jericho Marchers, QAnon, or any of the other groups responsible for the atrocities of that day. Their foundation, their motivating ideals are rooted firmly in the ungodly mixture of Christian nationalism and white supremacy. It was not only a disgrace upon everything this nation purports to be striving for, it was a full-on condemnation of Christian nationalism, white supremacy, and the destruction they cause as they wrap the cross and an American flag for the purpose of supporting their needs of their fragile egos. Or at least it should have been a condemnation of them. Given the core teachings of Jesus, which we see reflected in the stories of his birth, I find it difficult to understand how any earnest Christian can sit idly by as white supremacists, seditionists, and insurrectionists commit these horrendous acts of hate, violence, and moral decay, all in the name of God. The leader of a nation, desperate to hold on to his power, sends a group of folks to the source of his consternation. And his attempt is to put an end to those who might challenge him. And ultimately, he is willing to spill blood in order to hold on to his sovereign authority. As I said in the beginning of this talk, in the perverted version of the Epiphany story that played out on Wednesday, this time the role of the wise men was played by the Proud Boys and others. And unlike in the original story, the choices they made were neither wise nor did they leave them with anything about which to be proud. The question that we must ask ourselves is, as followers of the teachings of Jesus, what role have we cast ourselves in? What role are we called to play? Shall we sit idly by as this blasphemy and sedition continue to play out? Or will we take the more difficult but more spiritual role and pick up the mantle of the wise ones in our story today, and outwardly practice resistance of injustice? Amen. As I said, we're going to switch it up a little bit. Instead of going straight to a prayer, we are going to have a piece of music. And I think it's wonderful. It's the reason we're having two. I really appreciated what each of these pieces have to say to us. I just couldn't put one of them down. They both are fantastic. So first, we're going to hear from a new friend, Emily Stewart, who some of you remember Josh Watson, I'm sure. Does a lot of kind of bluesy stuff for us. As I understand it, Emily is a friend and frequent co-writer of Josh's, and her song is entitled "Enough is Enough." If I get the right one up. I thought I had it. That's interesting. Let me try one more time here. Some reason it only wants to show both. So what we're going to do is take one of them down for now. If I can. It's always something. It did not go as seamlessly as I would have preferred, that's for sure. Here we go, folks. I think I have it for you this time. And I would be wrong. Technology, you gotta love it. Let's see if we can do this again, folks. I only going to give it a couple more shots, but I'm going to get it right in one of those couple more shots. Here we go. Please enjoy Emily. Told you I was going to get it right, but was switching back and forth. There, now we got it. Enjoy.
I'll tell you all my secrets, 'cause you're from out of town. I'll be moving along soon too, when I get this wheeling round. I've been holding this thing together, on sweating faith alone. There's a caterpillar eating leaves off of every seed I've sown. I'm gonna write myself a letter, and every side hard to trust. My big eyes may not seem wise, but you know that enough is enough. And the suffocating silence, certain commentary in. Nobody likes a liar with an empire to defend. I'll give you all my money. There's a few bucks left. Future all depends on fancy lawyers playing chess. I've been honest, kind, and faithful, played fair as best I can. Some folks only ever care about what feels good to them. I'm gonna write myself a letter, every side hard to trust. My big eyes may not seem wise, but they know when enough is enough. And the suffocating silence, the sun commentary in. Nobody likes a liar with an empire to defend. I'll show you all my weakness. You can probably tell I cling on to hope like a hermit crab clings to his shell. I've been weathered, bruised, and broken, told the world saying ain't real. Some folks never want the ugly truth to be revealed. I'm gonna write myself a letter, every side hard to trust. My big eyes may not seem wise, but they know when enough is enough. And the suffocating silence, certain commentary in. Nobody likes a liar with an empire to defend.
I enjoyed that song from Emily. Thank you, Emily. I know that I did. And it had a nice kind of matching theme. So thank you for that very much. Let's take a moment now and enter into a time of reflection, meditation, prayer. Accept it however is best for you. Um, let's enter that time together now. Good and gracious God, may we be reminded of the interconnectedness of life. May we be convicted with the reality that a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. May we be inspired towards lives lived out for others, lives that persistently shout out, I demand justice. We demand justice. May we continue to become modern day John the Baptist, shouting out in today's deserts, which are so unnecessarily littered with the pitfalls of the powerful. May we shout out into today's deserts calls to lower the mountains that divide us, calls to raise up the valleys which entrap us, calls to make straight the sometimes crooked ways of the powerful, and calls to make smooth the rough places of life that can sometimes bury those on the margins underneath the unbearable knowledge that profit and power and prestige seem to be more important to the world than their own dignity, and that the unique reflection of God found in them is somehow less valued than others. May we be the bringers of justice. May we be lights on a hill. May we be salt onto the earth. May we be the harbingers of justice, voices for equality, God's love for a world in need. May we be your people. May we act like it, bringing peace and love and justice to all of creation. So my issue earlier with playing both songs was just that I was trying to have two songs ready in QuickTime at the same time. And QuickTime decided it didn't like that. A little practice might have been advised for me. So I am going to now pull up the file that I had to close down from Bruce Piephoff. We all know Bruce pretty well at this point. He writes amazing, wonderful singer-songwriter songs. And I'd like to share one of such songs with you now. This one is entitled A Song We Could Not Sing. I hope you enjoy it.
Song we could not sing. Looks like it's gonna take a long time to make it back on home through the rain. It looks like it's gonna be a long ride on this lonesome midnight train. Looks like it's gonna take a good rhyme to make it back on home through the night. And looks like we're gonna see some hard times before we all can step into the light. But that old black man, he just sits out among the stars as he whispers a word into the wind. For the young man he sees running wild, dying for a dream of red clover in the end. Seems like it's been such a long time since I met someone else riding on this train. But I bet you it won't be such a long time before this old world's in love once again. For I can see the blue and the green shining through, and I can see a golden dream for you. But we've been too long a-dying for a song we could not sing. Done been out on the edges a bit too long. But that old black man, he just sits out among the stars as he whispers a word into the wind. For the young man he sees running wild, dying for a dream of red clover in the end.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that from Bruce. I always do, obviously. That's why he just shared so much. And Emily, thank you for your song. It was fantastic. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Greatly appreciated. Again, if you think about it, please leave your location in the comment section. If you're a church member, let us know that you're a church member. Like I said, COVID is worse than it's ever been. So let's not become complacent. Stay home as much as you can. When you can't, wear your mask over your nose. Wash your hands at least 20 seconds. Maintain physical distance of at least 6 foot. Even when you're inside, wear your mask and maintain that distance. And most importantly, love one another. Thank you again for joining us.